So thanks again for your attention and your interest in discussing the business of clinical trials and who pays and who profits. And as it was previously mentioned, we're going to focus most of our time today on resources that have been shared with me through the years. And so I want to acknowledge a couple of groups because that is where a lot of the slides and the material came from. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and the Cystic Fibrosis Therapeutic Development Network. They spent a lot of time through the years educating research coordinators and research teams on a lot of things involved in conducting clinical trials, but really focusing on budgets. So I'm going to share a lot of that information with you. Kate Hilliard and Patrick Flume are two colleagues in the CF community who have done a lot of work, again, to educate researchers within the CF community at Rainbow Babies, and then Dr. Flume at the Medical Center of South Carolina. So they were gracious enough to share a lot of their slides with me today, so I just wanted to give them credit. So our objectives and goals for today, we just want to understand and review the business of clinical trials and what we mean by that, discuss developing fair and appropriate budgets, understanding both the straightforward and under-recognized cost. And that's what I really want to emphasize, because that's where I think we will spend most of our discussion, is those under-recognized costs, developing a system for effective cost recovery, and then I'm going to share with you some tips and some tools that we use in the CF Center to negotiate our industry budgets. So what do we mean by the business of clinical trials? And to me, this is three parts. You have managing a program, which is hiring your employees, developing your team. It takes a long time to develop an established research team. Firing employees, training and certification, equipment maintenance, supplies, developing a performance portfolio. And what I mean by that is your own center and how you perform. We measure all of our metrics across the board, from how long it takes us to start up, to negotiate budgets, how long from when we receive an IRB protocol, how long it takes us to submit that IRB protocol. And, you know, to sponsors, time is money. So when you have a quantitative way that you can measure these things and find areas for improvement, you strengthen your negotiation when you're back and forth with sponsors in clinical trials. Then you have to manage the clinical trials themselves. You have feasibility assessments. Why are you going to take on the trial? Is it a scientific interest? Matching participation to interest is a community need for the community that you're doing. Does the study match the aims of your research program? And recruitment is challenging sometimes in managing that, especially when you have multiple studies who are recruiting the same patients, and recognizing that lack of success or lack of enrollment does not equal no cost. And how do you manage that? Which brings us to that last bullet of how you manage the money across the life of the study. So I think it's really important, before we talk about negotiating budgets, is to talk about knowing your cost. I think it's really important that we all understand exactly what your costs are before you go in to negotiate a budget with the sponsor. So you have the indirect cost, right? That's, of course, the money paid to the institution for the infrastructure cost. And then you have your patient care cost, which are obvious cost, x-rays, labs, etc. And then you have the personnel time, your PI time, your RC time, administrative support. Those are kind of, I think, what we talk about as kind of hidden costs that we may not do a really good job of capturing. And then poorly defined but often extensive between patient demands on the team. And what I mean by this is some of our sponsors are quite needy. And it's not necessarily the patient visits that cause us a lot of time, but it's managing the study in between the patients. And it takes a lot of time from our staff. And so we have to account for that and recover those costs. You have your study startup cost, you have your invoice items, and then you have your study closeout. And you always want to prepare in advance for FDA audits, should they occur.
It's somebody calling in on the phone.
Okay.
And I can't control them. If you can just ask if they're on the phone, we mute them. So.
If you're on, are you on the phone? Are you there? If you are, can you mute your line, please? FDA audits in document storage. So this is something that has always been very frustrating to me, and sitting through budget development classes through the years is I would always hear a lot about know your startup costs, know your startup costs. Be sure you recover your startup costs, but no one would tell me what my startup costs were or what they should be. And I'm not telling you what your startup costs should be. These are ours. I was just going to be transparent. I was going to share them with you. Maybe yours are higher, maybe they're lower, but I think it just gives us a point for discussion or something you can see where you can kind of think about your program and maybe how you should set your costs. So we have personnel rates that we set. PI rates are $250 an hour. RC, regardless of if you're a nurse or non-nurse, is $90 an hour. Admin is $80 an hour, and then research assistants are $50 an hour. And so all of these things that you see here are on letterhead, signed by our director. And when a sponsor approaches us and they say, oh, you know, oh, we would like to discuss this budget with you, I send this to them and I say, that would be great. Here's our program startup fees, and these need to be inserted into the budget. And it lists, these are the basic ones. We have others, but I thought these were the ones that would be common to everyone. Feasibility questionnaires, of course, IRB preparation, budget contract preparation, training for ECRF, site initiation visits, if we need to develop source documents. If you have an area where you see your patients, there may be a fee for that. We do, it's called the Child Health Research Unit fee. Our pharmacy has startup, and these average costs come to about $19,000 for us, plus indirects is about $25,000. And so this is kind of basic where I start, and then I add in other things if they're needed or eliminate some things that may not be needed. And I think you really need to know your invoiceable items, right? And you want to develop these in advance, know what they are, get your pricing for them, and be prepared so that when you send your startup costs, you can say, oh, and here's our invoiceable items. And these will need to be added as line items as well. You have things that might happen, but then you have things that will happen that you should always try and recover your time for. Things that might happen, what I mean by that is screen fails, extra pregnancy tests, unscheduled visits, travel, overnight stays, meals, adverse event. If they're serious or not serious, you should recover PI time for reviewing that and RC time for preparing the documents, creating the source documents, dry ice, amendments, renewal fees. I'm not talking about the IRB fee. Of course, you have to recover that, but the time it takes your team to prepare that. And then all those IND safety reports that they ask you to read online, and then they ask you to print them and sign them as well, even though you read them online, and then file them. You should recover all of that time. You know, it's time spent that you should recover. Document retrieval after closeout, you should put that in there. And then, of course, FDA audits. Just some of the common things that we have invoiceable, a list that we provide invoiceable items for. And then the things that will happen. Your monitoring visits, sponsors don't really like to pay for that, but we don't like to back off on monitoring visits. Archiving and data storage, dispensing fees, conference calls, closeout fees. Just remember all of those things. I also try and recover travel to study visits or study meetings. Sometimes I can get it, sometimes I can't. Site selection visits is another one I try and recover costs for. But it's helpful if you have all of these costs in your head and you know what they are, put them on letterhead, and you can show these to the sponsor before you start negotiating. So we're going to talk a lot about budget tools, right? And there's some initiatives on campus where we are working collectively to try to develop budget tools. But I think it's important to realize the tools that you have, that the sponsors give you, that you don't want to overlook. And that is your study schedules and your protocols, looking at your population, your inclusion, exclusion, your study drug. You need to remember that don't ever expect a sponsor to give you the amount of compensation you deserve, because they're never going to. They're only going to give you what you negotiate. And usually it's not the sponsor that doesn't want to pay, it's the CRO, because they have this budget, and what you don't get, they get to keep. And so sometimes I've had to go over their head, but when they're saying no, 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 sometimes the sponsor has no idea they're saying no. So just keep that in mind. You really want to look at the visits, evaluate by time, how long it's going to take you. Read things like adverse event reporting guidelines. Sometimes they can be different and more detailed or outside of your normal practice or what you would expect. And then data collection procedures. Take a look at those as well. So also just some tips to remember, it's not just the screening visit or the visits, it's the preparation that happens before the visits. Pre-screening, recruitment, preparation time. How complicated is your population and their history? How much history are you having to collect? That can be a real burden on RCs collecting medical history and on PIs to review it to be sure patients are eligible. After the visits, there's a lot of things that occur: data entry, queries, processing, specimen collection, and then of course invoicing and reconciliation. You want to recover all of those times. So about 8 years ago, I've been working in the CF Center for 15 years, and about 8 years ago I started doing budgets. And I think the one thing that hit me that I thought, wow, the person who was doing our budgets had never looked at the protocols. And so I thought, how, I know she was a financial person and she was very talented, but how are you recovering the cost if you don't understand the protocol? You know, so I think we developed a process where we could work together because I benefit from her financial background, but then I can bring the knowledge of the protocol and we can be sure that we do a better job, because there's some things in protocols that sometimes can be hidden. You really want to identify the length of every visit. How long is it going to take you to do all of these things? For example, tests that are billable, you want to be sure you can, you know, notice those. Are there technical fees and professional fees on those tests? Because those could be some things you could overlook. Are your labs central? Or are they local? Because that could change your cost. And these footnotes, I'm convinced this is why they do this. It's because they hide costs down here. You can read things about labs, you know, a lab draw, but then you read the footnote and it's pre-drug, 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, plus PK and all of this processing, and some of them need to go out the day of, and some can go frozen, and so there's a lot of things down there that if you don't really take the time to read, you may overlook and miss some cost recovery that you could have otherwise gotten. So this just really helps you if you really, the person who's working on your budgets, if they can learn to use the tools and the protocol to help them identify some of these costs. If you deal with studies that have a lot of standard of care items in them, this is a tool I use where once I get the schedule of events, I mark things with an X that are for the study, and I mark things with SOC that are standard of care. And then I can kind of subtract out things that don't need to be included in time, just so if most of our studies do not involve standard of care type procedures, but the ones that do, this is a helpful tool that I use to try and separate those two tools. So use these things as worksheets. They're great tools to use. Again, it allows you to separate standard of care costs if you have those. You may find things hidden in here that aren't otherwise in the budget. And remember that every visit should include PI time, even if there's no physical exam, because PIs have to review the data. They're reviewing, or they should at least, the data that was collected and everything that went on. So you should be charging back for PI time, even if there's no physical exam. Include RC prep time, little tidbits there. Don't forget those things. The time for data entry and queries. And don't shortchange yourself, because it takes a lot of time to do these things well. So now that you have all of your tools and you provide all these things to the sponsor up front, you're ready to negotiate your budget. And if you have the same experience as I do, I go through this process, I give them all of our costs, I kind of have my figure, they send me theirs, and we couldn't be more far apart, right? And so you're like, yeah, that's great, but how do you come to an agreement? First thing, remember that it's the CRO that may be tough on not giving you what you want, not the sponsor, because they want to keep that money. For them means more profit. Follow the same process for every study. It will make your negotiations stronger. Put all of your costs on letterhead, because when they ask for justification, you have it. You've got to know how far you can lower your costs without losing money. And I think that's why it's so important that you really understand your costs. cost so that you know how far you can come down. Understand the concept of fair market value, and we're going to talk very briefly about that. Establish a checklist for all aspects of this process. That's something we do so that you know how to go through your startup cost, you know how to go through your study management cost, you know how to go through your closeout cost, and it helps you not to overlook anything. And then you have to know when to walk away. And so I think that PIs and the person who is negotiating the budget sometimes are not on the same page with this, and it can be challenging. And so I think it's a conversation that you have to have and kind of come to an agreement of what's our bottom line and why are we doing this study and when are we going to say no, even if you walk away and it's temporary. So very briefly, fair market value. You can Google fair market value and read all that you want about it, but the sponsors say that a lot, right? I'm sure you've heard that. Well, you know, that's not fair market value. Well, fair market value is the average cost of charge of procedures across all markets. So it may be based on previously negotiated amounts from your center or a combination of other sites. And they may determine the lowest negotiated amount for an item and then apply it to all sites involved. So I remind them that fair market value has to be addressed per site and it has to be addressed per market as well as disease because it's different. And also in response to the protocol specifications, is it inpatient or is it outpatient? Because that makes a difference as well. So just remember those things when sponsors say, oh, that's not fair market value. Sometimes they don't see the big picture. So you negotiated the contract, you did the work, and it's time to collect the money. So a little trivia, 26%. What is the average percent of budgets that research sites do not collect due to lack of invoicing? 26%. That's a lot of money, especially when you spend all this time putting these costs into budgets and then you don't, you walk away with all this money on the table. So this is something that we've noticed over the last 2 or 3 years in our center that we could do a better job with was recovering the money. And we kind of thought, oh, well, these monitoring visits and all these SAEs and these patient-specific things that were occurring, the research coordinators know they occurred because we did them. But how did that information ever get to the financial people or to the billing people, and how did they know? It was in the budget, but how did they know to bill for them? There was, just not a good process. It wasn't a person, it was a process that we didn't have in place, and so we wanted to improve that so that we could recover our cost. So while we wait for Encore, because we all hope that Encore is going to help with this, I would really encourage you to develop a system for tracking all charges. If it's Excel spreadsheet, if it's whatever the communication is between your coordinators and your financial billing people, some sort of communication. For us, we're on different parts of the campus, and it makes it complicated. Remember to submit all invoices for these items according to the time schedule in the contract. And you want to reconcile those payments on a regular basis so that you can see what monies have come in and what haven't. And remember, don't ever close your grant until you are sure you have received all payments. So just a little bit, very briefly, about the system that we use for billing. This is FileMaker, and Dr. Isabel Lowell used FileMaker to develop a billing program for us that we could use to track all of this and make it really simple for our billing people and our research coordinators. So these are just a couple of screenshots I'm going to show you. She's here. If you have any questions for her, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer them. But basically, this is our database that we use. And so we have a financial section. We put all of our sponsor information in. We have our study information. We put our subjects, our invoices, and our metrics. Just one other screenshot. You can see here, does this work? Across in the green tabs, you see the contract, the IRB, the budget, site initiation. Those are all where we track our metrics. So we can see when our site received the protocol and when we submitted it so that we can eliminate delays there. There's nothing we can do really about the contract negotiation time between UAB and the sponsor or how long it takes the IRB to get the review complete. But we try and set goals. So when we receive a protocol, we want to get it off our desk and submit it to the IRB within 2 weeks, and we can track and see how long that's taking us. We do the same thing for budgets, site initiations. We store our protocols and our informed consents here. And then all the coordinators have tablets, so you can take this into the room. You can access all these documents while you're seeing patients. And the beautiful thing about it is that while you're seeing your patients in real time, you can enter all the financial billing information. So you can add the screening visit, you can put the patient in, and like magic, because Dr. Lowell built all this stuff in the background, the amount for the screening visit pops up there, and it creates an invoice. And then, oh, they had an SAE, you can add that. Oh, there was a monitoring visit yesterday, you can add that. Oh, I had to do an unscheduled pregnancy test, let me add that. You can do it all right there. What's fresh on your mind for the coordinators, then the billing people can pull it up. They can create an invoice. This is just a simple invoice and email it right there from FileMaker. You can go to the financial dashboard and we can track and see what we emailed out, what monies have come in, and what's the delay. So we're really hoping that this improves our efficiency in recovering some of our billables while we are waiting on Encore. So a couple of examples, and like I said, there's some initiatives on campus where we are working together to develop budget tools for sites to use. I was just going to share with you the one that we use. I like, and I know you can't see it, but just I wanted to show you how it's divided into sections, because it allows you to account for every phase of the study. So this is the site standard cost tab where I can put in everyone's rates. I can put in my PI's rate, my RC rates, admin rates, and all the billables that I know of, the spirometry, the charge, labs, x-ray, whatever. I can list those charges down at the bottom, and it's built in. And then I can go to the study phase cost section. And this is where I can recover all of our costs for managing the entire study, from conference calls, IRB submissions, budgets, renewals, all of those things. Other invoiceable startups, I can add those here, and it's just an organized way to see your budget so that you can be sure you're accounting for everything rather than one big spreadsheet and some things get lost in the details. This is the subject cost tab where you see all the visits, and you can put in your PI time and your RC time, your admin, whoever's involved, and you can put the hours per visit that they're going to be required to spend when the patient comes in. Their meals, their compensation, everything can be entered here. And then I use my schedule of events tool there at the end if I need to separate some standard of care costs so that I don't overcharge time if I don't need to. And then it creates a summary budget. And then this is what I would send to the sponsor. And if the sponsor sends me a template and they say, oh, well, here's our template, you have to use this one, I always use mine first, because I can better account for our charges, and then I can transfer into theirs. This is a startup tool that we use that you may find helpful if you need help gauging time for personnel involved. You can list those kind of things here, from budget review, IRB review, contract negotiations. If you're new at this and you're just trying to wonder, how long does this take us? How much time? You can kind of see it all there. If you're I can get my head around it a little bit better. So these are some tools too that I'm happy to share if you think you could benefit. So that's it, and I think now it's time for our panel discussion.
Sure.
Heather, thanks very much. What we thought we'd do is ask Steve and Mark and Mansour to come to the front, each representing different aspects of clinical trials at UAB with CF, pulmonary, and oncology, anticipating that across the group that's here, you may have some questions that they could beneficially answer. So I know I have a number, but I'm actually counting on everyone who's sitting in the room to come up with some questions.
And a promise to date, can I buy you?
No. So, who's going to be brave and ask the first question?
I wondered how you come up with your hourly rate for particularly study coordinators, because I went to a conference saying, standard 20-80 hours per year, you divide it by their salary, get for the study coordinator 50 to 60, 70 hours or dollars per hour. but the conference said deduct vacation, sick leave and everything and use that. So you get the 90 to 125, they said is the range they use, and sponsors pay that. How do you usually come up with your hourly rate for all the staff, but particularly the study coordinator?
Heather?
Yeah. Well, I know that from the CF Foundation, right, and that's the only experience that I have, but we've had a lot of workshops where we get together and you can't, is this one on still? Yes? Okay. That's okay. You can't say this is right, rates are different across, the country. But what we talk about is a range. And I don't know the formula that the foundation used, but the range that we were given, and some of the sites I saw were charging up to $100 an hour, for example, for research coordinators. It ranged from 75 to 100 was the range. So we took our highest paid research coordinator and then used a formula, which I can't recall what that formula was, and came up with this hourly rate. But then we were within the range and the guidelines that they gave us, which was 75 to 100. So I know some of our colleagues and centers across the country are charging more per hour, and some are charging less. I haven't had any pushback from any sponsors on our hourly rates.
But one of the breakthroughs was when the foundation, the CF Foundation, got us together as the centers as a network to allow us to compare notes. And we realized there was huge disparities in everything that we did, including on this amount. And so getting some type of framework from others was really important. So even if you don't have a CF Foundation to help you do that, there are ways to do that at national meetings or local meetings or what have you, and encourage you to think about getting your budget people or your research coordinators to start to compare notes with your peers to try and help with best practices.
I think I should add that beyond that, I think we at UAB ourselves, we work with Bristol Myers. If you work with Bristol Myers, what they're paying you, they should pay me, or vice versa. If we communicate amongst each other, I'm sure the sponsor will see that we're unified, because I can be sure within my own colleagues in the cancer center, the TMS study for phase 1 is paid differently for startup, etc., as the phase 2, phase 3, because we ourselves have coordinated our charges or our discussions with the sponsor.
And I'll add to that is that it's really important that we're having this meeting, because it's just starting to become apparent to us that they're starting to use that against us. So if we have somebody who's not well prepared, not accounting for their real costs, negotiates poorly, then that same sponsor might come to us for a very different topic or study, and their opening bid is going to be, well, Dr. So-and-so paid this rate, we expect you to do the same. And so it's good that what we communicate. We shouldn't overcharge anybody, but we should charge our true costs.
There's always this concern, if you charge too much, they'll walk away. I'd rather us walk away than they walk away. So we did a study, we did a background study, 8 centers doing a phase 1 trial. We got information. We were the lower, second, third. Well, the lower out of 8, we were number 6. So there were 8, 4 or 5 of them who are above us. So I think the notion that we may be overcharging, once you have the data, which is the justification for your budget, it's difficult to compare it. I mean, and what the sponsor wants is an invaluable patient. If you can deliver that, they will pay you more. What the CRO wants, you get less, they get more. So it's a matter of negotiation.
So I guess this question is more for Heather. On your study startup, is it non-negotiable? And have you walked away just at the very beginning when they've said no?
No, I tell them we can negotiate. But I know no one has ever said no. They do say, oh, wow, you're the most expensive person in the country. And I know they say that to everybody, right? And so I know that is not true. And I simply say, well, that's the cost of doing business. And, we can negotiate some of these things, right? Because I want to play ball, but I think I know in my mind how low I can go on some of those things. And so I give a little, they give a little, and then we meet in the middle. But I haven't had anyone tell me no. We have threatened to walk away from some studies, and it's escalated to the sponsor, and then they always come back and say, we want to cover your costs.
A big chunk of that piece, and Heather said it in the presentation, but understanding your own performance and adequately representing your good performance is a big important part. And so they know we're among the 40 CF centers, the third fastest startup time, right? Or that we deliver the studies and can present the work, or whatever you think we might be paying for, or gives you as value as a site. Start measuring it so you can represent yourself.
Part of it also is, I think they may negotiate with Heather. I think Heather might say, Steve, I'll have to talk with the PI. The PI finally can jump off the scale and talk with the sponsors at MD to an MD level. We often have the PI totally unaware of the costs, unaware of what Heather's doing, in this case probably not. But then the PI is totally incognito. So the PI has to understand these figures to be able to really side with Heather and compete and confront the sponsor.
It is a negotiating tactics. They will kind of come to me and I push them back to Heather, right? Heather is doing a great job. So I don't need to interfere with that and undercut that, because it's an undermining strategy that you need to be cognizant of. Because certainly I don't know how many hours it takes to do an EKG as well as Heather can report, who's watching the coordinators or doing them herself. So I think that's an important aspect of it.
I would like to add that, as Dr. Solly said, we are seeing a great many of our industry sponsors throw back metrics at us from other departments within UAB, that they negotiated this rate with Cancer Center, and it was different from ours. So they are keeping the metrics.
They are.
And they're trying to use them against us. One thing that I would like to add, and maybe play the devil's advocate here on this timeline, many processes at UAB have now been rolled out to ancillary groups, such as valve, radiation safety, different departments of which we have no control over the timeline. So sometimes our timelines get extended by the ancillary reviews. And so that sort of messes up the metrics when you look at it that way. I would highly encourage y'all to keep up the education to the PIs, that there are people in the background working on these type issues that are not really in the forefront of what they're thinking about.
Right.
And that helps all of us.
It does. And when we track our metrics, we track all steps. So we can see our team and where we're involved and where we're not, and the steps that we have no control over. And so then it's helpful when you look at it to be able to see that.
So let me just chime in. Dr. Kimberly reminded me to talk about the time trial activation, TTA as we call it. We count TTA from the CDA to the first patient on study, and then you can take it wherever you want to take it. And I think knowing those figures, knowing exactly how we take from the CDA to the first patient on study is very important. If you don't have that, so just to give an example, the phase 1 before we started 2.5 years ago was 186 days, 6 months. By 6 months, MD Anderson has closed the study. You just have a token patient to put on just for the sake of it. But now it's 110 days because we could measure it, go to the OSP to say, by the way, it took you 6 weeks to do this, etc. So I think each of us has to have our own metrics. And I think the schema that you put together will be at least one we should at least abide by. And you're right. In radiation safety, for example. So in cancer center, you have x-rays. And the question is, if you have one x-ray more than standard of care, that is an exposure that requires radiation safety. But if a patient was survival at 6 months, even 10 x-rays will not make a difference. So we have to educate radiation safety, look at the patient population to really determine whether you want to meet about this particular case. I think that's where we have to really uniformly talk to this institution to say, by the way, what is it that can be excusable, or at least looked upon in the context of the patient population.
So I think we all have a tendency, and I do too, to want to, and there's not really blame, but want to discuss non-PI or coordinator activities that are leading to the delay, like radiation safety, IRB, contracting. But when we actually went back and audited ours, they are there, and we can get them as fast as the human, maybe faster than we do now. But our problem was not there. Our problem is me or the coordinator or an administrative person pushing our part. So yes, radiation safety is the one that drives me more crazy. And I hope they're not here, but I still think there's a lot of room outside of those that you can't control to make a big difference.
I'll echo a couple of points. The time to first is also, if we condensed it down to one metric that you wanted to start with as a junior person or a nation group, that's the one. And then secondly, I would echo what Mark said, is we had extra pressure on us to get better at this, right? We have an infrastructure grant from the CF Foundation. It funds some of our infrastructure, just a component of it, to help us be ready for the next sponsor and to be good researchers, have our techniques ready, et cetera. But that amount, the value of that grant is determined based on our metrics, and there's a bunch of metrics that go into it, so hence the need to characterize it. But when we too were at the not as good as we wanted to be on contract performance, we started to track it all, and things that we used to say, oh, contracts, was actually our time to answer the contract question, or we lost track of the contract question, or we don't provide the right information that contracts always wants every time in front, right? They had to ask for it. And so we got rid of those types of problems in our own shop, and things sped up a lot. And then when we were still at a barrier, then we could say, look, we're slow. Let's have a meeting and to talk about, how to speed that up. And they gave us additional things that we could do to speed things along. And now our process is a lot more refined, and we do a better job of meeting their needs to move things along.
Just to add to that, you need an ombudsman like a navigator who really puts up with the time of trial activation. I think the PI cannot manage it, nor can Heather. Usually an independent person looks at where is this protocol along the step of the way, so you can identify the physician's on vacation, he's been sitting on his table for 2 weeks, didn't get signed, etc. Secondly is, your TTA may be different than what the sponsor has. So you have to find out what are their metrics, because often when we ask them, how long do it take us to get activated? And this is only take you 160 days. When you go back, what they count is different than what you've counted. So I think it's very important to adjudicate that as well.
Heather, can you give some background on you mentioned a 26% in your presentation, how that number was arrived at, or where?
Yeah, that was in the literature when I was searching. So I don't know if they looked at universities across the campus. I don't know how that or across the country, how they got to that, but I saw higher. I saw up to 46%.
And that's a
dollar amount. Yes.
So I think one of the other things that's important is we looked at least in the Department of Medicine, there's a significant number of clinical trials for which there are historically been zero in invoicing, meaning none of the things that Heather talked about get invoiced for. The second thing is that startup numbers, the 25,000 is high. If you look at, again, in the Department of Medicine, the typical is like 5. So not everybody's going to be able to go out and get 25,000. There's a little bit of a thing we ought to talk about at some point, which is when you have a very successful high power operation like yours, you do have a little bit more push power than, say, some brand new investigator doing their first study and has no track record of any kind. It is unlikely probably they're going to give you that full 25,000. On the other hand, the starting bid of 3 to 5, which is what a lot of them are, is woefully inadequate, and they will give more than that. So some of this is not a question of necessarily adopting every single thing on that list today for every investigator on campus. But if we could make, I think, some incremental progress, you would see large differences in the money flow.
And it's true that we did get there over time.
That's correct.
We under-recognized our own value, but also our value, CF was hot and our value improved over time.
But the counter to that would be, I would say most investigators undervalue the sponsor's desire to have you on board. And so most people want to do it, they want to do it, and they'll sort of take any deal that they can get. And the truth is, even for brand new people, there is definitely pushback room on all sort of the starting bids that they put out.
So to add to Heather's invoicing, the next part of our invoicing is accounts receivable. So I was in private practice. For us, how long did it take for the money to come in after you had the invoice? Beyond 90 days, it was 6%. I can tell you at UAB, accounts receivable will be going on 90 days, at least 30%. That means some bank is you borrowing money from someone who is paying for that invoice until you get your money in. I mean, that is unheard of in business. I think the notion, this is the business of medicine, who pays, who is profiting? And the question is, even if you've invoiced, when you get the money in is critical.
So as a comment to, I think, Dr. Dransfield, you mentioned it perhaps maybe relative to the challenges to the startup of a trial. Maybe it was you, Dr. Rowe, I'm not sure now. With IRB account, yeah, with IRB accounting, OSP and the like. And my comment is previously, or perhaps maybe even currently, there is a challenge with, PIs or costs not being obtained or charged to an account because of the challenges of obtaining an account from accounting. And I want to just mention that there is a new process relative to at-risk accounts that a lot of programs and divisions and directors aren't necessarily aware of. So not having an account number stop you from charging those costs appropriately, whereas now there's a system in place where you can have that account pretty quickly during the early stages of creating that clinical trial.
Can you tell us what at-risk account is? I didn't know this until I got involved into this. So if you could define what an at-risk account is, I think it's important for the PIs to understand.
I think you can probably do that better than me. Yeah.
Yeah. So an at-risk account is a pending account. So it's an account that's established prior to, sometimes prior to the negotiation of the contract, or at least the finalization of the contract. And it allows departments to be able to, charge cost, PI time, coordinator's time, for example, before the contract is actually finalized. Because oftentimes than not, departments like to say, hey, listen, I don't want to charge time until I know that I have that contract in place. So the pending account or at-risk account allows you to be able to not wait to charge those costs to the appropriate account. So that at-risk account ultimately becomes the account for which that clinical trial will be.
Industry-sponsored clinical trials at the time that the contract is submitted. The dates for the at-risk account go back 1 year prior to that submission date and 1 year forward. So they're basically for a 2-year period with the intention that you get that contract executed and it switches over to being the actual account. One thing you do have to follow up on is a lot of times we hit the end date for the at-risk and nobody at grants management updated it from the at-risk to the actual account. So all of a sudden everybody's thrown off the study. It's just a simple phone call to get it straightened out. However, that's just a little glitch in it. But it does allow you to actually place your effort and your expenses against what you are actually doing. And if it goes in the red, the department would have carried that cost anyway. So then it goes back to your variable cost share account.
It is at-risk. If it gets executed, somebody has to pay.
Set up for industry, however, you've got grants that scored well and you are familiar, you can ask for an at-risk. But industry is set up like that.
We do a lot of at-risking in our center to as soon as it looks favorable, then we'll put it in an at-risk so we don't fall behind on the accounting. It makes it easier for the accountants to do their job.
So if I could sort of ask all of you to respond to a question. We've talked about some numbers and effective budgeting at the beginning. And we've talked a little bit about the accounts receivable at the end and invoiceables. And I think you had the number 26% is sort of a literature average of what's not invoiced. One of the interesting observations in this space is what's the difference between negotiated budgets when we all sort of do our own thing versus perhaps having some people like you, Heather, who are experienced? And is there a difference in the ultimate budgets that are negotiated? So I actually have data on that. And this is based on the experience at Yale. Would anyone, I'm actually going to ask all of you to think about what you think the difference, if any, is between the budget when it's sort of everyone does their own thing, as opposed to having a somewhat more informed approach. How many think the difference might be 10%? Nobody? Less than 10%? More than, oh. How many people think 20%? Wow, this is
The price is right.
This is an aggressive group. I'm going to go up by 10. So guys, you know, can't go up by more than several hundred. 30%. It's okay. 40%. 50%. 60%. Okay. Anyone care to, would you like to know what Yale's experience was? This is actually done through their clinical trials initiative across a number of sponsors. The number was 52%. So if you think about it, and this is being fair and appropriate, this, to your point, Steve, these are budgets that are appropriate. These represent an understanding of our true costs. So it's fair and appropriate, 52%. Add to that, if we can tidy up the back end of the process by 26%. Anyone really good at math? What that's going to be? That's going to come close to doubling the income. Just something to keep in mind, because the goal here is to do really well on clinical trials. And the whole reason for having the budget discussion is to make sure we can enable the processes which allow us to achieve the excellence we all strive for. That's really the goal, but it's important to keep these opportunities in mind. So remember, front end 52, back end 26, do the math, and then we can figure out how we're going to use that money to do a better job in all of the trials that we do.
That's so important, because I'll just say that we were not financially solvent when the CF research kind of portfolio was not financially solvent when we first started. And it was only after we became financially solvent and figured out the problems with the process that we could then hire that extra coordinator instead of apologizing that we had one. And then we could do more studies and better studies and be more selective about the studies we were choosing to do in accordance with our academic goals.
So Bob, I mean, maybe Steve and Mark, just like with an at-risk account, the at-risk PI is a young junior investigator who's hungry to do a trial, wants to do it quickly, and does not understand all this. I mean, so Steve and Mark, in your department or your division, the young investor comes to Heather and he or she gets support from the get-go, or he's so hungry he negotiates half of his salary already to the sponsor and say, by the way, I'm ready to do the study, and you have to bail him out? Or how does it work? Because that's where we have trouble.
For our group, if you're doing CF or what we call like the CF-like conditions, bronchiectasis and primary ciliary dyskinesia, other things that are in our portfolio research, then we adopt them and they go through the same process. Heather will, negotiate their budget and such. That's the way we've handled it. But it took time to get there. At first, we did not do that, but now we do.
We do the same thing, but the problem arises when you have somebody who doesn't fall into one of the sort of well-established shops for their particular area of interest. So in pulmonary, a good example several years ago would have been people doing ICU sepsis studies for which there wasn't really an academic investigator with any NIH funding. It wasn't really a track record of doing it successfully, and the person sort of went out on their own. We didn't help them. You didn't help them. The division itself might have been ill-equipped to help them, and we got a lot of this, a lot of poor budgeting and not good financial outcomes. So I think as, all the way up the chain from the centers, division, department, we have an issue, I think, in terms of being able to help that person, and we probably don't do it as well as we could.
So would you frame this as opportunity more?
Certainly, it's an opportunity.
Good.
Everything's an opportunity. Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question to your point. It's sort of the opposite question, actually. So as a junior investigator that works with our business officer and more senior faculty to design a clinical trials budget with the industry sponsor, particularly with respect to effort of the team and the PI's effort, what types of activities of the PI are you consistently writing off and not expect to be reimbursed? So for instance, when I've presented a budget of my effort anticipated for like a pilot study, for instance, I've sort of gotten feedback that I may be asking the sponsor to cover unreasonable activities of me. For instance, like weekly data monitoring with study coordinators for a pilot study where we don't know what's going to happen. And so when you do your negotiation with the sponsor, where do you draw the line? And as a junior investigator, how do you discuss with your more senior faculty about making sure that you get the salary support or the effort support that you think you deserve for the time that you're planning on putting into that study?
Well,
It's a tough one.
to me, it seems like probably what you do is
I guess the point
Yeah.
I'm coming from is sometimes as junior investigators, we get the statement that this study is important for our department, and that's kind of the feedback I've gotten on some things.
meaning
Do it.
they don't, yeah.
But you're getting that from the department, not the sponsor. The department.
Correct. Yes.
Well, it could be. I mean, the reasons to do an industry-sponsored study are either one, you're not supposed to say make money, so cover costs with a little extra. Two would be, we do a lot of them because it allows you to keep your staff stable. So if you depend on, NIH grant, NIH grant, NIH grant, unless you're ultra successful, that's going to mean hiring and firing regularly. So an advantage to doing industry trials is it's sort of a consistent stream of funds that allows you not have to go through that process over and over again. So that would be the reason we would do it. Then the third reason would be you're getting academic credit of some kind. So if you're doing a phase 4 trial of the 7th statin, you're not going to be on the paper. That's not a reason to do it. On the other hand, if you are going to be on the paper, then it's more appealing. Or it's something of, great scientific interest to you or your mentor. I'm a little confused by it's really important for our department argument. I think in terms of where to start, probably relying on people that have done this for a long time and are older may not be the best way to do it anyway, because we obviously have shown you that we're doing a great job of recovering money. I mean, I think it's like going to buy a house, you start with $500,000 and then you get rid of the sunroom and the pool, and then you get down to a more reasonable number. I mean, I think it's better to start with everything that you would want. And the sponsor said, that's the other thing is, all they can say, CRO says no, sponsor says no, and that's the worst that they can say, right? So I don't think asking for it. What we don't do usually is ask, and that is what generates the problem.
Yeah.
That's a long answer.
It seems unlikely that you would have a walk away scenario. If this one's really important for the department. Well, like you said, you came in too high. Okay, well, we've looked. Maybe we do eat it because it's going to be a New England Journal publication.
I thought the question you were asking is,
I was going to say, I probably didn't answer it.
no, I look at it slightly differently. To say the division head says, okay, I'm protecting you for 60% of your time. The 40% is work RVU. And out of the 60%, you're saying, how much do I have to generate so I can appease him? So you're saying, I'm spending 2 hours per week on this study. Well, I should bill the sponsor for something so the division head can say, here's the contribution that the junior faculty is making. And there is always this dilemma between work RVU as well as sweat equity, which is, I think, we all have to invest in, and how much can you charge for? And I think that's a discussion that needs to be had at a high level, because research is not a hobby. It takes time and effort. Part of it is sweat equity. The other part is, if we at UAB really want to premiate research, we might as well pay for it. Yeah. I'd like to know from Lakeisha, I mean, from the budgets we know, you've been here for a long time. Have we been breaking even in the negatives, or are you just funding all these great ideas but really not making money?
No, I think what we find on average is that we have many clinical trials who are operating in the red. So those who didn't hear me, I think what we're finding from a financial perspective, that across the board, at least in the School of Medicine, that many of our clinical trials are operating in the red. So there is an expectation that the department and or division subsidizes that clinical trial.
So are there any other burning questions? As I look at my watch, the witching hour is almost here. We have time for one or two more questions. Jim has one.
So my question is, how does this compare to federally funded trials? So the NIH gives us a grant. We can't nickel and dime the budget. A lot of things are included in indirect costs, I suspect. So how do we do with them? Do we do better? Do we do worse? Is it all over the place?
We have different rates for those studies. They are negotiated differently, you know, and our startup costs are much different. Our personnel rates are different. We have a lot of, the one infrastructure grant Dr. Rowe mentioned is one reason why when we're doing studies that are funded by the CF Foundation, why our prices are different. So I think that's a whole different discussion, but to your point, yes, that we negotiate those much differently.
Yeah, and one big reason, as you said, not only do we have a CF Foundation, we have an NIH P30 grant that funds a clinical trial unit. So it would be double dipping for us to, I mean, we're ready to start up an NIH grant, we're ready, and we can cut those processes out, but specifically, that NIH grant is not to go to subsidize pharmaceutically sponsored research, right? That's against the law. And so they're different.
What we didn't discuss today was an investigator-initiated trial, the IIT, where it's really bare-bones CBCs paid for, and really the nurses, basically the slim nurses that you get, the PI says, I'm going to give up my time and effort and sweat equity. That is a different discussion. We talked mainly about
and for us, that falls into our NIH pool. Our NIH grant is to help junior people do CF research. So we don't charge them that because we have a NIH grant that helps get that started.
That's why getting the money back from the industry trials that you are doing, making sure you're paid, that you're not in the red is so important because that money helps you then do those other investigator-initiated trials and still keep your people informed.
I think there's a second federal model as well, Jim, and that's primarily in the oncology space for comprehensive cancer centers. There are certain kinds of group trials that are required that you participate in. Everyone knows that structurally those are underfunded. And there we as an institution make the mission decision that it is important for us to do those, and we will support those trials. So there are really sort of three different models. There's that model. Then there's the other federal trials where often some of the infrastructure is handled through P30 grants. And then there's the industry model. And being aware of what both the important scientific opportunities to improve healthcare, that's probably number one, but then understanding the practicalities of each of the trials is really important for us to succeed as an enterprise.
But just sort of figure in oncology, we look at pharmaceutical trials. There's data for this. For a phase 1, which is dose escalation, pharmacokinetics, all the biomarkers, really the cutting edge work, the sponsor pays $100,000 per patient. This is what they give. What you don't get, the CRO gets. For a phase 3, every day a trial is open, oncology trial, it's $1 million. And most trials are open to accrue patients for 4 years and 4 more for survival or whatever the endpoint is. So it's a lot of money. So when we don't negotiate to the hilt with good data, we are leaving money on the table for somebody else to take. And we didn't know this until you realize that, I mean, you have to have some competitive market analysis about this. And I think if we can at least collaborate amongst ourselves, Bristol Myers working within the Cancer Center, or BMS has drugs that work in immunology or rheumatology or even pulmonology. I mean, they themselves have their own silos as well. So we even reinforced those silos with our own little silos. So I think this was really a welcome opportunity to talk about this. And maybe Heather should be cloned and.
Well, I think Mike has one final question for the hour.
And so one topic that was on Heather's slides that we haven't touched on too much is no accrual does not mean no cost. And anecdotally, and this is more for the PIs, and I would like to hear if this is actually true or not. Reason for opening a trial is if we don't open this one, they won't bring us any more. So if we don't open this Merck trial, we need to open this one so that they'll keep bringing us trials. And that often is a reason for opening a trial that doesn't seem to be accurate, but I wanted to know if you've had any indication that that's actually true. You've ever had a sponsor tell you, if you don't open this trial, we won't bring any more.
My first response would be quite the opposite. I mean, they're paying to deliver the study. So you should pick studies to deliver the study. And we've had sponsors that we work with repeatedly where we will say, no, they say, come on, we really need this one. You know, this is our potato, right? You're giving you some meat and now we have to give you this potato. And we use our own data. Look, we don't have any patients that with that genotype and that inclusion criteria. This is we will do you a disservice. And in general, if you message it that way and it's accurate, you're not lying, then it will be better for everybody. The last thing they want to do is pay startup and have it die, because not only does it cost them and cost you, and you probably won't come into out in the green in that, the mental capital is not inconsequential.
But I think that there are a lot of people who think that. Part of it is I think a lot of PIs don't understand how much it is actually a business for the sponsor. So if they think you can succeed, they'll want you to do it, whether you did it before or not. But I think we all want to feel like, oh, they wanted me to be a part of this, and they really don't care a lot of the time. Yeah.
So perhaps on the note that we don't want to do the best we possibly can, first for the patients and the participants in the trial as we move the science forward, but also do it in a way that enables us to support the enterprise. That may be the predominant theme tonight. And thank you all. Heather, thank you for leading off with the discussion of some of the issues for us to consider. Obviously, this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation, and we look forward to moving all of this forward, not only in each of the tools that you've described this evening, but also in terms of the continued rollout of Encore and some other processes as well. So, folks, thanks very much. We're after the hour.